Hidden on maps, a tiny sea passage once gave Russia immense power over a NATO member. For decades, one country was forced to ask permission to access its own port. But a $450 million engineering marvel changed everything, revealing a bolder, silent war unfolding across the Baltic. When examining maps closely, it becomes evident that global power balances are often linked to critical sea passages, a strait, a canal, or a narrow coastal channel. These seemingly insignificant points are invaluable to whoever controls them. On the southeastern Baltic Sea coast lies one such passage, the Strait of Baltiysk, connecting the Vistula Lagoon to the open sea, passing directly through Russia's Kaliningrad territory. This strait was the geographical leverage Russia silently exploited for decades. Poland, a NATO and European Union member, and one of the continent's fastest-growing economies, became one of its longest-suffering victims. For 30 years, Poland was compelled to seek Russia's permission to access its own port. Russia wielded this advantage, blocking ships, banning passages, and effectively strangling a city's economy for decades. However, Poland eventually constructed its own canal to bypass Russia. By investing $450 million, Poland opened a direct waterway from its own territory to the Baltic Sea. What it truly acquired was not merely a canal, but the sovereign ability to say no to Russia. This took 30 years to achieve, primarily because geography had long favored Russia. In Poland's northeast, the convergence of a lagoon, a strait, and Russian territory created a 30-year-long dependency. The Vistula Lagoon stretches for approximately 90 kilometers along Poland's northeastern coast, separated from the Baltic Sea by the narrow Vistula Spit, a strip of sand. The lagoon's sole natural connection to the Baltic was the Strait of Baltiysk, located at its northeastern tip, which fell within Russia's Kaliningrad region. Consequently, any Polish vessel aiming to reach the open sea from the port of Elbląg, situated on the lagoon's shore, was forced to navigate through Russian-controlled waters. While this posed no issue during the Soviet era, the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, and Kaliningrad's subsequent status as a distinct Russian territory, transformed this geographical detail into a potent political chokehold. Despite years of negotiations to formalize transit rights, a lasting agreement proved elusive. The fragile arrangement Poland secured demanded 14 days advance notification to Russian authorities for each ship passage, approval that could be arbitrarily denied, and a complete prohibition on foreign vessels from EU member countries. Russia ruthlessly exploited this leverage. Between 2006 and 2010, a total ban on passage through the strait was enforced. For 4 years, sea access to Elbląg's port was effectively cut off. Even after the ban was lifted, Russia maintained its soft pressure through exorbitant transit fees and deliberate bureaucratic delays. The cumulative impact over decades was severe. Elbląg, a city founded in 1237, had been a major European trading port since the Hanseatic League era. Yet, under Russia's geographical stranglehold, its cargo traffic plummeted from 358,000 tons in 2014 to roughly 125,000 tons by 2021. A port city with 7 centuries of trading heritage was gradually throttled by a geographical veto disguised as a strait. Poland's definitive response was to bypass that strait entirely, forging its own direct access from its territory to the Baltic Sea. Construction of the canal, carving a path through the Vistula Spit, commenced in 2019 and concluded within 3 years. Though its total length is a mere 1.3 kilometers, these vital 1.3 kilometers severed Poland's 30-year dependency. The canal is approximately 5 meters deep, accommodating ships up to 100 meters in length. Around 12 medium-sized vessels can transit daily, a depth too shallow for large cargo ships or warships, but perfectly adequate for Elbląg's commercial and tourist needs. This depth limitation would later become a crucial point, as Russia would falsely claim that NATO frigates intended to use this very canal. The canal's operational mechanics are as fascinating as its dimensions. 2 swing bridges rotate 90 degrees to allow ship passage, ensuring road traffic remains uninterrupted. However, the true engineering marvel lies in its lock system. Its chamber measures 270 meters long, 25 meters wide, and approximately 6.5 meters deep. 4 robust steel gates, each weighing around 160 tons, regulate transit. The total cost for this ambitious project reached approximately $450 million. That's $450 million for 1.3 kilometers, or over $340 million per kilometer, making it one of the most expensive canal constructions in modern European history. Yet, what Poland truly acquired was not merely an engineering project, it was sovereignty, tangibly manifested as infrastructure. To truly grasp the value of this newfound sovereignty, one need only look at the other side of the strait, at the territory Poland had to seek permission to access for 3 decades. Kaliningrad is an exclave, completely isolated from mainland Russia, nestled between Poland to the south and Lithuania to the north, entirely encircled by NATO and EU territory. Following the Soviet collapse, Russia clung to this region for one critical reason. It houses the headquarters of the Baltic Fleet. Russia didn't merely safeguard this base. It transformed Kaliningrad into Europe's most heavily militarized territory, bristling with Iskander ballistic missiles, S-400 air defense batteries, and advanced anti-ship systems. The strategic rationale is stark. Approximately 230 kilometers east of Kaliningrad lies NATO's most vulnerable point, the Suwalki Gap. This gap, only about 65 kilometers wide at its narrowest, represents NATO's sole land connection to the Baltic states. To the west of this critical corridor lies Kaliningrad. To the east, Russia's ally, Belarus. Russia could potentially squeeze this corridor from both sides, effectively severing Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania from the rest of NATO, rendering over 6 million people unreachable by land. Furthermore, Russia's use of Kaliningrad extends beyond conventional military pressure. In 2024, Baltic undersea cables were cut, GPS signals are being systematically jammed across the region, and shadow fleet tankers have been observed carrying intelligence personnel. Kaliningrad has evolved far beyond a mere naval base. It is the epicenter of all Russia's pressure operations in the Baltic. The Vistula Canal must be understood within this broader context. Its 5-meter depth is indeed too shallow for warships. No NATO frigate can pass through, and Russia was well aware of this. However, in a conflict scenario, Poland can now conduct patrol and logistics operations within its own lagoon without ever having to enter Kaliningrad waters. The canal's true military value isn't in accommodating large warships, but in shattering Russia's geographical monopoly. Russia did not passively observe its geographical monopoly being dismantled. It launched a 3-pronged campaign to obstruct the canal's construction. The first front was an environmental argument, directly targeting EU institutions. Russian state media disseminated reports alleging the canal would lead to the extinction of local species. Moscow abruptly declared plans for a national park on the Russian section of the Vistula Spit, an area it had shown no interest in for decades. The objective was to trigger EU-level environmental reviews, thereby delaying the project through bureaucratic hurdles. The irony, however, was profound. Upon completion, the exact opposite occurred. The artificial island formed from excavated material created new nesting habitats for coastal birds. Russia had predicted habitat destruction. Poland, in fact, built new habitats. The second front was an economic argument, aimed at swaying Polish public opinion. Research from a Polish university calculated that commercial returns would take an astonishing 650 years to recoup. Russian commentators widely publicized this figure to portray the project as fiscally irresponsible. When viewed purely through commercial metrics, this argument held some genuine weight. Poland's primary ports in Gdańsk, Gdynia, and Szczecin were already operating efficiently, and the canal's depth was indeed insufficient for large cargo vessels. The third front involved a military argument, designed to influence international public opinion. Russia asserted that the canal would grant NATO warships access to the lagoon. However, this claim was easily refutable with a simple depth chart. The canal's 5-meter depth rendered the passage of any NATO frigate physically impossible. Russia knew this. The concern was not genuine. It was pure theater. Poland's strategy was to avoid directly engaging with any of these 3 arguments. They consistently classified the canal as civilian infrastructure, quietly completed the EU's environmental review process, and never entered public debate regarding Russia's military framing. They didn't argue, they built, and the manner in which they built is as significant as the structure itself. While Putin harbors dreams of an empire on Ukrainian soil, he has yet to fully grasp that he is losing his true empire at sea. For the Kremlin, the Baltic Sea is more than just a body of water. It is Russia's economic lifeline, with over 80% of its oil exports traversing its waters. Yet today, NATO's influence increasingly extends over that crucial lifeline. Scandinavia has initiated what could be described as the greatest strategic encirclement in history. On one front, massive tunnels pierce the seabed, On another, advanced missile systems target Moscow. This developing iron ring effectively confines the port of St. Petersburg to an inland lake. To comprehend this monumental encirclement and engineering offensive, we must first delve into the silent war unfolding beneath the dark, cold waters of the Baltic. The Kremlin's recent strategy involved threatening undersea fiber optic cables, data lines, and energy pipelines, aiming to coerce the West to the negotiating table through energy and communications blackmail. Russia's demonstrated capability to physically access and sabotage undersea fiber optic cables in the Baltics triggered urgent alarms at NATO headquarters. However, instead of merely deploying more ships or increasing patrols in response to this hybrid warfare and escalating tension, the Scandinavian capitals of Helsinki and Stockholm embarked on an audacious engineering initiative designed to fundamentally alter the rules of the game. The Finnish government, in particular, proposed projects of staggering scale and ambition. The overarching goal was to physically connect the Scandinavian peninsula to the European mainland using concrete and steel. At the core of this ambitious plan is a massive railway tunnel project, the Finest Bay Area, designed to run beneath the Baltic Sea, connecting Helsinki with Tallinn, the capital of Estonia. This is far more than a simple transportation investment or a metro line between two cities. It is a geostrategic maneuver that logistically removes Finland's island-like isolation, integrating it directly into Central Europe's extensive railway network. Once operational, military and commercial cargo loaded in Finland will be able to flow into the heart of Europe without ever surfacing, thereby circumventing the threat of Russian warships or missiles. This bypass operation completely nullifies Russia's naval blockade threat. While Russian ships contend with storms on the surface, NATO tanks and ammunition will reach their destinations below, traveling at 100 kilometers per hour in complete safety. This engineering offensive is not confined to the south. Similar activity is underway in the north, where the Confederation of Finnish Industries is advocating for a bridge or tunnel link between Sweden and Finland, passing through Turku and the Åland archipelago. This route effectively transforms the northern entrance to the Baltic Sea, the Gulf of Bothnia, into an inland lake, reducing Russia's maneuvering space there to zero. The inspiration for these groundbreaking projects originates from the south, the engineering marvel that is the Öresund Bridge, connecting Denmark and Sweden. With 7.5 million vehicles crossing it annually and generating $215 million in profits in 2024, this bridge stands as a testament to success, proving the viability of the model and its role as a vital logistical artery during times of crisis. Now, Finland has even commenced feasibility studies for a new northern link, the Kavarken Link, between Umeå and Vasa along the Gulf of Bothnia. The Kavarken Link project is conceived not merely as an economic corridor, but also as a critical military backup route. In the event of a potential conflict, even if the southern sea lanes are jeopardized by Russian missiles, NATO could transport ammunition arriving at Norwegian ports to the Finnish front, and from there, to the Russian border within minutes via this northern route. Once this comprehensive network is complete, while Russian ships battle storms and NATO patrols operate above, the alliance's vital logistics will flow silently, uninterrupted, and untouchable within these subterranean tunnels. While these tunnel and bridge projects forge strategic infrastructure and logistical resilience, a military pincer movement is closing in on the Swedish island of Gotland, right in the heart of the Baltic Sea. Dubbed the unsinkable aircraft carrier by military experts, this island is Russia's worst nightmare, acting as a stopper blocking its vital escape routes. The power that controls Gotland becomes the undisputed master of air and sea traffic across the entire South and Central Baltic. With Sweden's recent accession to NATO, the advanced sensors, Patriot air defense systems, and coastal anti-ship missiles, now deployed on this island, have transformed the Russian air and sea corridor, from St. Petersburg to Kaliningrad, into a veritable death zone. This means Stockholm now holds the sole decision-making authority over what enters and exits Kaliningrad, and even which routes Russian military transport aircraft are permitted to take. Russia's most strategic base in the West is effectively held hostage by Sweden's initiative. However, Russia's nightmare extends beyond mere logistical bottlenecks or increased economic costs. The war has now arrived directly at its doorstep, threatening its most intimate strategic areas. Consider the map from a broader perspective. Through the cool-headed eyes of a general, this iron ring in the Baltic is merely the beginning. The Swedish armed forces have explicitly stated their desire for weapon systems with a range of up to 2,000 kilometers, capable of striking military facilities and critical infrastructure deep behind enemy lines. This is not a technical detail, it is a geopolitical earthquake. Open a map and measure. The distance between Moscow and Stockholm is approximately 1,000 kilometers. In modern warfare technology, this distance signifies a front line, not a backyard. When Swedish Defense Minister Pål Jonson states, "We must create a stronger deterrent against this threat," he is, in diplomatic language, effectively shouting, "We will not only defend our borders, if necessary, we will strike Moscow in its bed." This rhetoric fundamentally alters the character of the war and Russia's centuries-old security perception. The Scandinavian buffer zone, which maintained neutrality throughout the Cold War and posed no threat to Russia, is now positioned like a high-tech spearhead aimed directly at Russia's heart. The Kremlin's long-standing propaganda, claiming NATO is approaching our borders, once used to consolidate domestic public opinion, has, as a direct consequence of Putin's own aggressive policies, materialized like a terrible prophecy. Military headquarters in St. Petersburg, air bases in Novgorod, and strategic missile silos outside Moscow are now within range of NATO's conventional missiles, leaving them unprotected and exposed. We have entered an era where the illusion of a safe zone on Russia's western flank, its strategic depth, has completely vanished. There is no longer anywhere truly safe for Russia. The geography of war has reached Moscow's doorstep. These developments are leading not just to a tactical defeat, but to a grand strategic encirclement operation. Russia is now entirely surrounded by 8 NATO countries in the Baltic Sea. The Kremlin's response, re-establishing the Leningrad military district after years, is not a display of strength, but rather an official admission of helplessness, a defensive reflex, and a state of panic. This northern wall, spearheaded by Finland, reduces Russia's strategic depth in the west to zero. Russian military strategists now categorize the Baltic and Arctic theaters, once viewed as separate operational areas, as adjacent and effectively lost zones. The concept of the canal had been debated for decades, but it gained significant political momentum in 2014 with Russia's annexation of Crimea. This event fundamentally altered Eastern Europe's threat assessment. A straight dependency on a coastline was no longer a theoretical risk, but a tangible security vulnerability. Jaroslav Kaczynski, chairman of the Law and Justice Party, who had championed this idea for decades, finally secured the necessary support. Construction commenced in 2019, and 3 years later the canal was completed. Poland deliberately chose its opening date, September 17, 2022. The day the waterway permanently severed Russia's control over the coastline, marked the anniversary of one of the darkest chapters in Polish history. On September 17, 1939, as Nazi Germany advanced from the west, the Soviet Red Army crossed Poland's eastern border, a coordinated double betrayal that led to 50 years of occupation. Poland chose this precise anniversary to inaugurate the canal that cut its geographical dependency on Russia. Prime Minister Morawiecki described the canal as severing the last symbolic ties of dependency as the first vessel, the workboat Zodiac II, navigated the new waterway. For the first time in 30 years, Elbląg had opened to the Baltic without Russia's permission. The following day, 95 ships successfully made the crossing. There's yet another layer to the timing. 7 months before the opening, on February 24, 2022, Russia had launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Canal construction had begun in 2019, a time when most European capitals still dismissed the possibility of a major Russian land war. Poland, having started construction then, had presciently anticipated the future. By September 2022, the strategic logic behind every zloty spent had been brutally validated. While the canal officially opened in 2022, it required additional time to become fully functional. The canal structure itself was complete, the lock system operational, and the breakwaters in place. However, on the lagoon side, the final 900-meter section of the Elbląg River lacked sufficient depth for commercial vessels. The canal was open, but the port remained only partially accessible. Now, in 2026, this final critical piece is being completed. Dredging works are scheduled to conclude in the second quarter of this year, at which point commercial vessels will, for the very first time, be able to reach the port of Elbląg directly. Tourism facilities have already expanded, and logistics companies have announced plans to utilize the port. For residents who witnessed the gradual emptying of their port area for decades, this change has become profoundly visible. Elbląg now truly opens to the Baltic without needing Russia's permission. Elbląg's story is compelling on its own, Yet Poland is not the only nation dismantling this established formula. Russia has consistently applied the same strategy across various geographies for decades. Control a bottleneck or transit point, foster dependency in the opposing side, and then wield that dependency as political leverage. In Poland, it was a strait. In Germany, natural gas. In Ukraine, a crucial sea passage. In Moldova, a transit corridor. The formula remained identical everywhere, and now it is unraveling everywhere. Germany experienced the profound cost of this formula in 2022. The Nord Stream pipeline had supplied Berlin with cheap energy for years, simultaneously granting Moscow significant veto power. When Russia abruptly shut off the gas, Germany faced one of the most severe energy crises in its history. Berlin's decisive response was to dismantle this dependency. Liquefied natural gas, LNG, terminals were constructed at record speed, rendering Russia's energy leverage inoperative within a single winter. Russia had sought to control Germany with gas. Germany structurally eliminated that control. At the Kerch Strait, Russia controlled Ukraine's access to the Sea of Azov, effectively holding the ports of Mariupol and Berdyansk hostage for years. In 2018, it physically obstructed Ukrainian naval vessels at the strait. Ukraine's answer, however, emerged from the sea itself. Drones compelled the Black Sea Fleet to withdraw from Sevastopol, and the Kerch Strait ceased to be Russia's unilateral instrument of control. Finland and Sweden, abandoning decades of neutrality, joined NATO, Russia's invasion ironically triggering the very expansion it aimed to deter. Meanwhile, Moldova is actively developing alternative energy and trade routes to circumvent Russian transit dependency over Transnistria. The common thread binding these transformations is their timing, all accelerated dramatically after 2022. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine served as a stark awakening for Europe, forcing every country to confront its own geographical dependencies. Poland responded with concrete and steel, Germany with LNG terminals, Finland and Sweden with NATO membership, and Ukraine with drones. The tools differed, but the lesson was universal. The only lasting solution against Russia's geographical leverage is to structurally eliminate that leverage. The formula is indeed breaking, yet it would be a critical error to underestimate the cards Russia still holds. The canal has opened, but Kaliningrad remains on the other side of the strait, bristling with Iskander missiles, S-400 batteries, and the Baltic Fleet. The Suwalki Gap did not vanish because the canal opened. This 65-kilometer corridor continues to be NATO's most fragile point, with a 2026 wargame simulation demonstrating the alliance's inability to defend it. Russia's hybrid warfare capabilities have not diminished. If anything, they are intensifying. Cable sabotage, GPS jamming, and shadow fleet operations are becoming more frequent in the Baltic. While geographical leverage is indeed breaking, Russia is actively developing other forms of influence. Regarding the canal itself, the commercial case remains weak. The 650-year return on investment calculation is a genuine figure, and ignoring it would be an analytical oversight. Poland's main commercial ports in Gdańsk, Gdynia, and Szczecin operate highly efficiently, and Elbląg will likely never compete with them. When strictly assessed as a commercial investment, the canal is difficult to defend. However, infrastructure spending has always served purposes far beyond mere commercial returns. Rural railway lines often operate at a loss to keep communities connected. Military installations cost billions to deter threats that may never materialize. No conventional return on investment calculation can answer the critical question: what would be the true cost of Elbląg's sole sea exit remaining under Russian control during a war on Russia's doorstep? Poland built the answer before the question was even fully asked. Russia weaponized geography for 30 years, controlling bottlenecks, creating dependencies, and transforming neighboring countries' access into leverage. Poland neutralized that weapon with concrete and steel, and 1.3 kilometers of canal achieved what 3 decades of diplomacy could not. The ability to say no to Russia is no longer contingent on a distant strait. It is firmly established on Poland's own sovereign territory.